make certain this works before we jump through. Old guy slide, we're perfect. Well, so my name is Daniel Epstein. I'm founder of a small organization with a big vision called the Unreasonable Group. And for the next 15 minutes, I have the privilege of telling you a little bit about what we do. I think more importantly, why we do that work, and probably most importantly, how it relates to the conversation here around shared value. Before I do that, I want to begin with a little bit of gratitude. Thank you to the Shared Value team for giving me this opportunity, and to all of you for lending me your ears and hopefully your eyes for the next 15 minutes. With that debt of gratitude, I think I should return the favor and rationalize a seemingly irrational name, which is why do I run an organization called Unreasonable? This is the Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw. George Bernard Shaw is famous for saying that the reasonable man adapts himself to the world, the unreasonable one persists in adapting the world to himself. Therefore, all progress depends on the unreasonable person. If George Bernard Shaw is right, if all progress depends on the unreasonable person, then in a world where 1.3 billion people don't have access to electricity, where 770 million people don't have access to clean drinking water, in the world that we live in today, if George Bernard Shaw is right, we can't afford not to bet on unreasonable individuals. So about a decade ago, when I set out on founding this organization, the Unreasonable Group, what I quickly learned is, like everybody in this room, we're not alone in this quest to define progress in our time. And I stumbled upon the United Nations. This was when I was a university student. And I learned about the UN Millennial Development Goals. And for those of you who aren't familiar, in the year 2000, the United Nations came together. They set out a charter, the UN Millennial Development Goals. They said that we are going to hit these goals by 2015. There were a little bit over 10 goals, but number one on that list, the most important goal that the United Nations determined for humanity was to halve the number of individuals living in absolute poverty. And everybody was on board with this. Nearly every nation in the world. This is the largest ratified treaty at the time in the history of humankind. It's actually not billions, it was trillions of dollars behind this. We had the global infrastructure to pull it off. Even Bono was behind the Millennial Development Goals. And the question is, what happened? If we zoom in on the region of the world that was most hard hit by absolute poverty, if we look at sub-Saharan Africa, we can see that the numbers aren't that good. There was a decrease between 1990 and 2010, 44.6% of the population to 44%, living on less than $2.50 a day. What's most egregious about these statistics is that because of population growth, in terms of absolute numbers, there are 140 million more people living in absolute poverty in sub-Saharan Africa today than there were when we went about setting those goals. Now, Einstein has a definition of insanity. For those of you who haven't heard it, it's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. As an organization at Unreasonable, we've taken this to heart and we decided that we need to look at this in a different way. How might we do that? We look to entrepreneurs. Now, this word is incredibly hard to spell. I've written it tens of thousands of times. Its roots are French and can be interpreted to mean to take into one's own hands. We believe so much in entrepreneurs because where most of the world sees market failures, issues, and problems, entrepreneurs, they have a curiously warped perspective. We look at the same thing and we see market opportunities and solutions, and then we have an impatience about having those ideas. We have to will them into existence. What we've learned over time, though, at Unreasonable is that entrepreneurs, I used to say entrepreneurs are the answer to every single issue that we face today. What we learned is actually that isn't quite true. That it's not just about working with the most disruptive, fast-growing breakthrough technologies that can solve our hardest problems. We need to align with the corporations that can help them scale globally. And this is our definition and our approach and of our strategic vision for what shared value is. So what I'm going to do is actually make this real and tell you stories of a couple of entrepreneurs that we've worked with over the years. A lot of people ask us how we do this and how we align with some of the world's most impactful entrepreneurs is through partnerships with these very large respected brands and companies. And the one I'm going to talk to you about today and that we're going to dive in after this session is Unreasonable Impact, which is in partnership and was co-founded and co-created with the team at Barclays. So to make this real, I'm going to tell you stories of a couple of entrepreneurs and how they're working with big brands. It's one of my favorite people alive. Actually, all these people are some of my favorite people alive, but this is Uma. Uma grew up in India. He always had the dream of becoming a doctor. He wanted to become a heart surgeon, and he wanted to work at the Mayo Clinic. He had lofty dreams growing up where he did, in the family that he did. But when he went out to take the test, and actually he'd probably kill me for saying this right now, this is live stream, so hopefully Uma isn't tuning in. He's too humble for me to say this, but in India you have national exams when you're applying to medical school. He was the #1 student in all of India. He ranked the highest in all of India on those exams, and so through a lot of struggles and a lot of time, he finally made it to the Mayo Clinic. After actually becoming a brain surgeon, he became an open heart surgeon. And he was working with stem cells in open heart surgery. And when he was working with stem cells, he realized that stem cells are regenerative. They grow on top of themselves, they multiply upon themselves. And he remembered back to earlier in his childhood, when it was his birthday, he was turning 10 years old. It was his birthday, and in the front of the house back in India, they were eating meat. In the back of the house, he learned that they were slaughtering the animals, and he saw that. And that had made him into a vegetarian ever since his 10th birthday. But when he was an open heart surgeon, he was working with stem cells, he realized, well, hang on, we can grow tissue. Cells can actually self-multiply. Why can't we apply that to meat? And so Uma created a company called Memphis Meats. Some of you might have heard about it in the news. They are literally creating meat from stem cells without the need to kill animals. Today, globally, we kill 70 billion animals every single year for consumption. If you look at global warming, this is one of the hardest trends to get over. It's how we farm and how we, in essence, manufacture meat. Memphis Meats is going out to change that. They're creating the first clean meat, no slaughter, 99.999% less land use, 99.999% less water consumption, zero methane, zero emissions, because they're not actually raising the cattle through life, just the stem cells. This is actually a picture of their chicken. The last one was their meatball. It is delicious. The question is, how is this relevant to big companies? Well, two of their largest backers with Memphis Meats, Tyson and Cargill. They know that this is the future of meat production. And by the way, we can halt climate change in its tracks with innovations like these. This also happens to be most likely a billion-dollar company. Another entrepreneur I want to talk to you about is Xavier. Xavier also was too smart for his own good. He was at Oxford University. He decided to take a trip to sub-Saharan Africa. Specifically, he went to Tanzania. And when he was in Tanzania, he saw a scene that looked something like this. This is a group of girls studying at night. On the African continent, 3 out of 4 people live without access to electricity. Still today, 3 out of 4 people don't have access to electricity. When you don't have access to electricity, if you're going to study at night, you're typically going to use one of these, which is a kerosene lantern. What we don't think about when we think about kerosene is that this is actually burning jet fuel. For the girls who are studying next to this, or anybody living inside of a house that's using kerosene lantern or a hut, it's the equivalent of smoking 2 packs of cigarettes every single day for every man, woman, and child in that house. It's a massive issue. Xavier looked at that, felt like we ought to be able to do something about that, and he was, at this point in time, looking at solar. So he launched a new company called OffGrid Electric. So this map, this is Tanzania. You can see Mount Kilimanjaro up in the corner. It's on the border of Kenya. And this is in 2012. They launched a pilot project. How can we replace kerosene lanterns with solar at a price that's cheaper than kerosene? This shows their pilot project. You can see these yellow dots appear. Each yellow dot is a new household that went from kerosene to solar. The reason they can do this is individuals live in absolute poverty in these markets. They're spending about 20% of their income on kerosene for lighting. Xavier, his company OffGrid, they can give you a solar system for less than that, and after about a year, you will actually own that. You pay through it through your cell phone. Who are their biggest backers? GE Ventures and Total Energy. Makes sense. They're looking at companies like OffGrid Electric, feel like this is the next GE of the African continent. Another entrepreneur, Ian, is a young student living out of Pittsburgh when the earthquake hit Haiti. And like many of us, he wanted to do something about it. He was a student at that time. He was at a bar with a friend, and he was telling his friend, "We gotta do something, we gotta do something." And apparently his friend said, "Stop talking about it, just do it." And he literally bought a plane ticket one way down to Haiti, had no idea what he was going to do there, but knew he had to go. The next morning, he found himself in Haiti, and when he was there, he saw something like this. He really saw 2 problems. One is that if you're going to rebuild the economy, you have to have jobs. There's no getting around it. 2 is there's plastic trash absolutely everywhere. So an entrepreneur with a warped perspective saw a huge market failure, but he saw an opportunity and created a company called Thread. They today employ over 4,000 individuals who 2 to 3x their income and go around the streets of Haiti, pick up the trash, they convert it into this material, almost looks like a yarn, they convert it into thread. How does this relate to brands? They partner with some of the world's largest brands. Most entrepreneurs really struggle, myself included, to give a 30-second pitch. Somehow they made an 18-second video that describes the whole company that I want to share with you really briefly. So that product line for Timberland was the #1 selling SKU on their website the first month it went out. So this stuff works. It's more profitable, it's creating jobs, it's taking trash off the streets. In essence, they're taking trash and converting it into something very profitable. I like to refer to entrepreneurs like Ian as alchemists. 2 more examples. We worked with a group of former NASA scientists and engineers. Their job when they're at NASA was to figure out how do we terraform Mars. A pretty cool job. They went around to some of the most remote regions on this planet that were similar in harsh environments to Mars and tried to figure it out. What they realized is that before we terraform Mars, before we make Mars livable for species, we actually need to re-terraform Earth. If you look at the stats, we need to plant 300 billion trees to get back to homeostasis in regards to climate change. And so they decided to focus their energies here. They launched a company that's in essence drones for good. Their company's called Biocarbon Engineering. This drone, it's their first prototype today. It can plant 100,000 trees in one day with one operator. The drone that's above it, it flies autonomously. It analyzes the topography and the soil below it. It communicates to the drone that has an air gun that literally shoots tree pods into the ground based on the communication with the drone above it. Who is their largest investor? Who's their largest partner? It's the largest drone company in the world, Parrot. Just makes sense. Very excited about this company. Their goal is to close that gap to literally plant 300 billion trees within the next 20 years. They can do it, and it's wildly profitable. Last company I'm going to tell you about, last entrepreneur individual, is truly one of my favorite human beings, and she's sitting right here. This is Jennifer. Afterwards, we're going to have a session with Jennifer to dive into her amazing work. But Jennifer retired, and she'll tell a little bit more of her story at one point, and then stumbled upon a technology that she couldn't turn her back to. Jennifer's background, she's a biochemist, and realized that she and her team could do something truly remarkable. Now, most of us, when we see an image like this, we see pollution. We see climate change, we see global warming, we see huge costs, we see taxes, whatever it might be. Jennifer and her team, they are true alchemists. They look at this and they see dollar signs. They see the ability to capture this and turn it into something valuable. How do they do that? Her company is called LanzaTech. This is their first prototype based in China. It's a process of fermentation. They literally ferment pollution. So carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. This is a steel mill. You see there's a smokestack there. Normally emissions would be going out of it. She's liquefying it and piping it into that tank. Looks just like a beer fermentation tank. They've bioengineered microbes so that with these bioengineered microbes and water and pollution, they can ferment carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide into both ethanol, which is jet fuel, and polyethylene, which is plastic. You can literally make jet fuel and plastic out of pollution. If you don't believe me, this is that pilot project gone to scale, which Jennifer will talk about. This plant here, once it's operational, is the equivalent of taking 80,000 cars off the road every single year. This is very profitable for the oil refineries and steel mills that they partner with. So how can brands work with companies like Jennifer's and LanzaTech? Boeing and Virgin Atlantic are a very good example of how you can do it. This year, they're going to take off on the first flight ever, a commercial airliner across the Atlantic powered on jet fuel made from pollution. That's happening this year. I Googled it, and I don't know why it says Hot 50 on there, but it just showed up. But this is real. This is Jennifer and clearly Richard Branson going about making history together, using business as a powerful force for good. Some of you are probably sitting back and wondering, so all of these companies I just mentioned, they're a part of our partnership with Barclays, Unreasonable Impact. And you may be thinking like this dog, okay, so what's in it for Barclays? How does this work? We just mentioned a lot of other companies. We survey our entrepreneurs. We have a lot of different data points. One of the really important questions is this one, which is after Unreasonable Impact, would your company consider partnering with Barclays? And as you've seen from the examples I've given you, these entrepreneurs are the future titans of industry. So if they can partner with Barclays, this is a magnificent opportunity. In our last program, we had 11 companies. The average company had raised in financing or made in revenue already $80 million. And at the end of that, because of this partnership and because the team at Barclays added so much value, when we surveyed the companies, across the board is unanimous, they said 5, which is we see Barclays as the most strategic bank to partner with. This is just smart business. Whether you invest in these entrepreneurs, you align with them, you add value to them, you connect them, by working closer with them and adding value to them today, they're going to work with you into the future. Broadly speaking, we have 118 entrepreneurs in our global community. They've raised over $2 billion in financing, generated over $1 billion in revenue. They've impacted over 400 million lives. You're probably looking at this statistic, seeing 240 countries of operations, saying there aren't 240. I sat down with our engineering team, had the same question, and they said that's because we're looking at countries and territories, so places like Puerto Rico. So literally every country, every territory in the world, these 118 entrepreneurs, they're touching at least one live, and they all want to work with you. I think in closing, just from a philosophical framework, this is how we think about shared value. Most of the world used to see a division that looks something similar to this: the nonprofit and the for-profit communities, the private sector and the public sector, doing well and doing good. In reality, I think that if we added a dimension to it, most of the world would have agreed actually it's an X and Y axis. And the higher up you are, the more money you're making, and the further to the right you are, the more good you're doing. And maybe that dot in the top left corner, maybe that is not to offend anybody, but let's say a Goldman Sachs investment banker, not a Barclays investment banker. Just joking. And if you scoot over, if you drop down to the bottom, bottom right, maybe that's a Red Cross volunteer. Move up. This is an amazing elementary school teacher in a tough neighborhood. And if we move up into that top quadrant, I think that's typically where people used to think social entrepreneurs and social innovation live. What we're trying to prove, and we believe have proved with this partnership and Unreasonable Impact, is that this is shared value. That actually you can't just do well and do good, but actually the most profitable companies in the world, the companies that are going to outperform all markets, are those companies that are doing the most amount of good in the world, that are going after solving the world's hardest problems. So with that, our fundamental value at Unreasonable is a belief that we is greater than I, that the only way we're going to achieve any of these lofty visions is through pathological collaboration, and hopefully by partnering with each of you. And so that's my email address. You can drop me a line if you want to get in touch. But more importantly, right after this session, we're running an hour-and-a-half session with Jennifer to jump into her business, figure out ways that we can add value, and to explore this partnership a little bit more with the team at Barclays down in Ballroom A. So this is a shameless plug. For the next session, join us at Ballroom A. We'll get a lot more intimate and drop into it. And this slide shows where all the sessions are up and coming over the next hour and a half. Hope you join us. Thank you so much for lending me your ears and for joining us on this journey. Thank you.